The ancient fir stood sentinel over Silver Moose Basin as snow blanketed the world in silence. It was here, beneath the endless sky, that Clara Bennett found herself abandoned, too small, too frail for the harsh mountain life, they said. Her family's wagon disappeared over the ridge, leaving nothing but tracks, soon covered by winter's first storm. The cabin they'd promised to return and build remained only a whisper on the wind. For 3 days she huddled in a makeshift shelter, her thin hands trembling against the cold. On the fourth morning, a shadow fell across the snow. A boy, not much older than her, 16 years, looked down with eyes that held neither pity nor judgment, only determination. "You need a proper home," he said simply, calloused hands already measuring the distance between two sturdy firs. What could drive a mountain boy to build a cabin for a stranger when everyone else had deemed her unworthy of the effort? Ethan Harper had lived alone in these mountains since he was 12. When the old trapper found him half frozen by the creek and taught him how to survive before passing on 3 winters later, the axe in his hand, worn smooth from years of use, had built his own small cabin 2 miles north. Now would build another. The girl watched him wearily, huddled beneath fir branches, her eyes deep brown against pale skin, followed his movements as he paced the small clearing. She looked like a winter sparrow, all hollow bones and quiet trembling. "You got a name?" he asked, kneeling to examine the soil near a promising flat stretch between 2 ancient firs. "Clara," she said, voice barely carrying over the wind. "Clara Bennett." She pulled a thin shawl tighter. "I don't need charity. They'll be back for me once they've established the homestead." Ethan nodded, not bothering to contradict what they both knew was a lie. 3 days was no accident. 3 days meant they'd traveled far enough to convince themselves she'd already perished. "Not offering charity," he said, standing to mark a rough rectangle with his boot. "Just a cabin. Everyone needs walls against the mountain winter. Why would you help me?" Suspicion crept into her voice. "You don't know me." Ethan tested the ground with the butt of his axe. "Out here, we help or we die. Simple as that." He glanced at the darkening sky. "Lost my folks crossing the pass. Old man Whitaker took me in, though he barely had food for himself." He shrugged. "Now I do the same when needed." As dusk approached, Ethan built a proper fire near her makeshift shelter, showing her how to arrange the wood for maximum heat with minimum smoke. From his pack, he produced dried venison and a small pouch of tea. "Too late to start cutting today," he explained, handing her a steaming cup. "But tomorrow we'll begin. Got a spot picked out. Good drainage, morning sun, evening shade." Clara accepted the cup with trembling hands. "I can't pay you." "Not asking payment." He stared into the fire. "Cabin needs building, and I can build it." The simplicity of his statement hung between them as stars emerged overhead. "I'm not strong," she admitted finally, voice small. "That's why they left me. Always sick as a child, never much help with chores. Father said I'd just slow them down. Be one more mouth to feed through winter." She looked down at her thin wrists, said they'd come back with a proper wagon once they had something established. Ethan nodded. "Strong comes in different ways. My hands are strong for building. Maybe yours are strong for something else." He unrolled a bare skin near the fire, but not too close. "You'll sleep in your shelter tonight. By first spring thaw, you'll have walls that keep out the wind. My word on it." Clara studied him in the firelight, his weathered face oddly young beneath a tangle of dark hair, hands calloused beyond their years. "Why a cabin? Why not just take me to the nearest settlement?" Nearest settlements, 4 days hard travel. Winter's coming fast. He gestured to the mountains surrounding them. "Besides, this basin is good land, protected, game trails nearby, clean water, good place for someone to make a life. You think I can survive here?" Alone, disbelief colored her words. Ethan stared into the darkness beyond their fire. "Everyone's alone out here," he said finally. "But alone doesn't have to mean helpless." He pointed to the stars. "Learn to read those. You're never truly lost." The ancient fir stood sentinel over Silver Moose Basin as snow blanketed the world in silence. It was here, beneath the endless sky, that Clara Bennett found herself abandoned, too small, too frail for the harsh mountain life, they said. Her family's wagon disappeared over the ridge, leaving nothing but tracks, soon covered by winter's first storm. The cabin they'd promised to return and build remained only a whisper on the wind. For 3 days she huddled in a makeshift shelter, her thin hands trembling against the cold. On the 4th morning, a shadow fell across the snow. A boy, not much older than her, 16 years, looked down with eyes that held neither pity nor judgment, only determination. "You need a proper home," he said simply, calloused hands already measuring the distance between 2 sturdy firs. What could drive a mountain boy to build a cabin for a stranger when everyone else had deemed her unworthy of the effort? Ethan Harper had lived alone in these mountains since he was 12. When the old trapper found him half frozen by the creek and taught him how to survive before passing on 3 winters later, the axe in his hand, worn smooth from years of use, had built his own small cabin 2 miles north. Now would build another. The girl watched him wearily, huddled beneath fir branches, her eyes deep brown against pale skin, followed his movements as he paced the small clearing. She looked like a winter sparrow, all hollow bones and quiet trembling. "You got a name?" he asked, kneeling to examine the soil near a promising flat stretch between 2 ancient firs. "Clara," she said, voice barely carrying over the wind. "Clara Bennett." She pulled a thin shawl tighter. "I don't need charity. They'll be back for me once they've established the homestead." Ethan nodded, not bothering to contradict what they both knew was a lie. 3 days was no accident. 3 days meant they'd traveled far enough to convince themselves she'd already perished. "Not offering charity," he said, standing to mark a rough rectangle with his boot. "Just a cabin. Everyone needs walls against the mountain winter. Why would you help me?" Suspicion crept into her voice. "You don't know me." Ethan tested the ground with the butt of his axe. "Out here, we help or we die. Simple as that." He glanced at the darkening sky. "Lost my folks crossing the pass. Old man Whitaker took me in, though he barely had food for himself." He shrugged. "Now I do the same when needed." As dusk approached, Ethan built a proper fire near her makeshift shelter, showing her how to arrange the wood for maximum heat with minimum smoke. From his pack, he produced dried venison and a small pouch of tea. "Too late to start cutting today," he explained, handing her a steaming cup. "But tomorrow we'll begin. Got a spot picked out. Good drainage, morning sun, evening shade." Clara accepted the cup with trembling hands. "I can't pay you." "Not asking payment." He stared into the fire. "Cabin needs building, and I can build it." The simplicity of his statement hung between them as stars emerged overhead. "I'm not strong," she admitted finally, voice small. "That's why they left me. Always sick as a child, never much help with chores. Father said, I just slow them down. Be one more mouth to feed through winter." She looked down at her thin wrists, said they'd come back with the proper wagon once they had something established. Ethan nodded. "Strong comes in different ways. My hands are strong for building. Maybe yours are strong for something else." He unrolled a bare skin near the fire, but not too close. "You'll sleep in your shelter tonight. By first spring thaw, you'll have walls that keep out the wind. My word on it." Clara studied him in the firelight, his weathered face oddly young beneath a tangle of dark hair, hands calloused beyond their years. "Why cabin? Why not just take me to the nearest settlement?" Nearest settlements, 4 days hard travel. Winter's coming fast. He gestured to the mountains surrounding them. "Besides, this basin is good land, protected, game trails nearby, clean water, good place for someone to make a life. You think I could survive here?" Alone, disbelief colored her words. Ethan stared into the darkness beyond their fire. "Everyone's alone out here," he said finally. "But alone doesn't have to mean helpless." He pointed to the stars. "Learn to read those. You're never truly lost. Learn to read the forest. You're never truly hungry." Something shifted in Clara's expression. The first fragile seedling of hope taking root. "I can learn," she said quietly. Ethan nodded satisfied. "Tomorrow we start with the foundation stones. Sleep now." As Clara retreated to her shelter, Ethan remained by the fire, mentally calculating lumber needs, days of work, supplies required. He needed to hunt less, build more. His own winter preparations would fall behind. It didn't matter. Something in her determined words had resonated within him. Out here, where the wilderness stripped away pretense and the mountains judged all equally, he recognized a kindred spirit, someone discarded who refused to disappear. The axe rested across his knees, its handle smooth from years of use. By spring, it would shape a home from raw wilderness and perhaps something more. Though what that might be, he wasn't yet ready to name. Dawn broke cold and clear, painting the mountaintops with golden light, while the basin floor remained in shadow. Clara woke to the rhythmic sound of footsteps crunching through frost-hardened ground. Opening her eyes, she saw Ethan approaching, tools strapped to his back and a small sack in one hand. "You came back," she said, her breath visible in the morning air. Ethan's expression didn't change. "I would." He set down his burden, an axe, a saw, rope, and various other implements Clara couldn't name. From a sack, he produced a small loaf of rough bread and handed half to her. "Eat." Days wasting. They broke their fast in silence as the sun crept higher. When finished, Ethan stood and walked to the clearing he'd marked the previous evening. Clara followed, pulling her shawl tighter against the chill. "First rule of mountain cabins," Ethan said, kneeling to examine a patch of earth. "Build where water runs away, not toward." His fingers dug into the soil, testing its composition. "Feel this." Hesitantly, Clara knelt beside him, mimicking his actions. The earth felt granular between her fingers with small stones mixed throughout. "Good drainage," Ethan explained. "Means dry floors come spring melt." He stood and paced the perimeter he'd marked, stopping occasionally to remove a stone or branch. "Second rule, know your light. Winter sun's precious. Need windows where they'll catch morning rays." Clara watched, fascinated by his methodical assessment. He moved with certainty, reading the land like a familiar book. "Can I help?" she asked finally. Ethan glanced at her thin frame, clearly calculating. "Start clearing stones, small ones first. Pile them there." He pointed to a spot just outside the marked rectangle. "We'll need them for the foundation." Clara bent to her task, determined to prove useful. The first stone she lifted, smooth and gray, about the size of her palm. She turned over in her hands before placing it on the designated pile. "This is the first stone of my home," she whispered, too quietly for Ethan to hear. The morning passed in rhythmic labor. Ethan felled 2 slender trees, stripping branches with practiced efficiency, while Clara continued clearing the ground. Though her hands soon developed blisters and her back ached fiercely, she worked steadily, pausing only when Ethan insisted she rest. At midday, he built a small fire and produced a handful of dried berries and jerky from his pack. They ate in companionable silence, the shared work creating a tentative bond between them. "Why were you left behind?" Ethan asked suddenly, his direct gaze meeting hers. The truth, Clara stared into the small fire. "I've always been sickly, fevers, coughing fits, weakness." She flexed her reddened hands. "Father said I wouldn't survive the journey to the settlement anyway. Said it was kinder to leave me here with supplies than watch me suffer on the trail." Her voice grew quieter. Mother didn't disagree. Ethan nodded, absorbing this without comment. And the supplies they left. 3 days' worth of food. Blanket. Flint. Clara's laugh held no humor. "Father said he'd return to build the cabin once they were established. I think we both knew he wouldn't." Ethan poked at the fire. People make promises easily when breaking them costs nothing. After their brief rest, they returned to work. Ethan showed Clara how to clear ground properly, removing roots that might later cause problems. When she struggled with larger stones, he didn't take over, but rather demonstrated a better technique, using leverage rather than strength. Like this, he said, slipping a sturdy branch beneath a boulder and pressing down. Let the wood do the work. By late afternoon, the foundation area lay cleared and level. Ethan began placing the larger stones in a perfect rectangle, teaching Clara how to find the flat side of each rock and position it securely. "A cabin's only as solid as what it sits on," he explained, fitting stones together like puzzle pieces. Rushed the foundation, regretted all winter. As the sun dipped toward the western peaks, Clara stood back to admire their progress. Though only the foundation stones were in place, she could already envision walls rising from the earth. "It's really happening," she murmured. Ethan gathered his tools as shadows lengthened across the basin. "Need to get back to my place before dark. Animals get curious this time of year." "You're leaving?" Clara couldn't keep the alarm from her voice. "Be back at dawn," he said simply. "Keep your fire small but steady tonight. Bank it like I showed you." As he shouldered his pack, he nodded toward the neat rectangle of foundation stones. "Tomorrow we start on the support posts." He paused, then added, "You did good work today." The simple praise warmed Clara more than the fire. She watched him disappear into the deepening forest. The smooth, gray stone, the first of her foundation, clutched in her palm like a talisman. Tonight, she would sleep beside a promise taking physical form. "Hold still," he instructed, his hands guiding Clara's smaller ones around the thin copper wire. Like this, gentle but firm, they knelt together at the edge of the forest where a small game trail wound between the trees. The morning air carried the scent of fir and coming snow as Ethan demonstrated how to set a simple snare. "The rabbit follows its path out of habit," he explained, watching as Clara's fingers mimicked his movements. "Doesn't see the trap until it's too late." "Seems cruel," Clara murmured, but continued her work. "Hunger's crueler," Ethan replied matter-of-factly. "When the snow piles high, you'll need meat to keep strength." 5 days had passed since they'd begun work on the cabin. Each morning, Ethan arrived at dawn, and together they labored until sunset. The foundation was complete now, corner posts set deep, and the beginnings of walls taking shape. But today, Ethan had declared a different lesson necessary. "Cabin's important," he'd said over their morning fire, "but knowing how to feed yourself matters more." The snare complete, Clara sat back on her heels, studying her handiwork with uncertain pride. "Will it work?" she asked if set right. "Yes." Ethan inspected the delicate construction. "You've got good hands for detail work." "Steady." But the unexpected praise warmed her. "My mother said my hands are my only useful feature. Said I could do fine stitching even when I was too weak for real chores." Ethan frowned slightly. "Seems your mother had narrow ideas about usefulness." They set 3 more snares along the trail before returning to the cabin site. Ethan had brought a small iron pot that morning, and now he filled it with water from the creek, adding dried meat and foraged roots. "Another lesson," he said, arranging stones in a circle. "A proper cooking fire doesn't waste heat." As their stew simmered, they returned to cabin work. Today's task was notching logs for the corners, precise work that required concentration. Ethan demonstrated first his axe making clean, controlled cuts in the timber. "Your turn," he said, offering her the tool. Clara hesitated. "I don't have the strength for that." "Try anyway," Ethan replied, not unkindly. "Won't know until you try." The axe felt impossibly heavy in her hands, but Clara was determined not to fail. Her first swing barely bit into the wood. The second was little better. Ethan watched without comment, neither helping nor criticizing. After several minutes of frustration, Clara stopped, breathing hard. "I told you," she said, disappointment evident in her voice. Instead of taking back the axe, Ethan stepped closer. "You're fighting the tool," he said. "Let gravity do the work. Aim, raise, and guide. Don't force." He adjusted her stance and grip without touching her directly, using his own hands to demonstrate in the air. "Try again, slower this time." Following his advice, Clara raised the axe and let it fall, focusing only on accuracy rather than power. The blade bit deeper. "Better." Ethan nodded again. By their midday break, Clara had managed to notch 1 log. Not as neatly as Ethan's work, but functionally sound. Her arms trembled with fatigue, but satisfaction outweighed the discomfort. As they ate their simple stew, a sudden gust of wind brought swirling snowflakes. "First Real snow coming," Ethan observed, glancing at the sky. Earlier than usual, Clara followed his gaze to the heavy gray clouds. "Will it slow the cabin building? Some can't set logs in heavy snow." Ethan considered the partially built structure. "Might need to strengthen your shelter for now." After eating, he showed her how to reinforce her makeshift fir branch lean-to, adding supports and weaving additional branches for better protection against wind and snow. "It's not a cabin," he said when they finished, "but it'll keep you alive until we can do more." In late afternoon, they checked the snares. The first two were empty, but at the third, Clara gasped. A snowshoe hare hung motionless, caught by her trap. "It worked," she whispered, a complex mixture of pride and sorrow, tightening her chest. Ethan knelt beside the animal. "Your first catch," he said. "You should take it." He showed her how to retrieve the hare and reset the snare, then how to properly dress the animal for cooking. Though her hands shook initially, Clara followed his instructions with growing confidence. "Respect what feeds you," Ethan said as they finished. "That's the mountain way." As dusk approached and Ethan prepared to leave, fat snowflakes began falling in earnest. "If the snow's too deep, I might not make it tomorrow," he warned. Clara nodded, clutching the rabbit meat wrapped in leaves. Her first truly independent contribution to her own survival. "I'll be here," she said simply, learning. The trading post sat nestled in a protected basin 2 ridges over a collection of rough-hewn buildings that passed for civilization in these remote mountains. Ethan approached on foot, a bundle of pelts slung over his shoulder. The monthly journey was necessary. Salt couldn't be foraged, ammunition couldn't be crafted, and certain supplies remained beyond his skill to produce. Inside, warmth from a pot-bellied stove greeted him. Several men lounged on benches, exchanging slow conversation that died as Ethan entered. He nodded briefly in acknowledgement before approaching the counter where Harlan Whitaker, the post proprietor, assessed him with rheumy eyes. "Harper," Harlan grunted, recognizing the young trapper. Early this month, Ethan laid his furs on the scarred wooden counter. "Need a few things?" While Harlan examined the pelts, whispers circulated among the men. Ethan ignored them, knowing his solitary ways often sparked curiosity and rumor. "Heard something interesting," Harlan commented, measuring tobacco into a small pouch. "Talk about someone building out in Silver Moose Basin. Someone with a girl." His gaze sharpened. "That be you, Harper?" Ethan met his gaze evenly. "Building a cabin. In your basin." "Ain't anyone's," Ethan countered. "No claims filed." Harlan scratched entries in his ledger. "Girl they're talking about. She yours?" "She's her own," Ethan replied flatly. "Needed shelter before winter." A bearded man by the stove spat tobacco juice. "Awful neighborly Harper. Never took you for charitable." Ethan remained silent, inspecting a bolt of heavy cloth. "Need this 10 yards. Harlan measured out the fabric. "Winter's coming hard this year. Signs pointing to a bad one." He looked up from his work. "Cabin won't be finished before first blizzard will be enough," Ethan replied. As Harlan tallied the exchange, a younger man approached. Curiosity overcoming caution. "They saying she was abandoned. That true?" Ethan fixed him with a steady gaze. "Your business how?" The man retreated, hands raised. "Just asking. Strange thing, leaving someone behind." Ethan completed his trading quickly, selecting items with unusual care. A small sack of dried apples, an extra blanket, a packet of needles, things he'd never purchased before. "Girl must be something special," Harlan observed, wrapping a small bag of salt. "Girl's just trying to survive," Ethan replied, tying his purchases into a bundle. Same as anyone outside. Gray clouds threatened snow as Ethan adjusted his load for the long return journey. The trading post door opened behind him, and Harlan stepped out, something clutched in his gnarled hand. "Here," the old man said gruffly, extending a small packet. "Peppermint drops. My wife used to favor them in winter." Ethan hesitated before accepting the unexpected gift. "OBL gets cut off in deep winter," Harlan warned. "Pass fills with snow 10 feet deep sometimes." Ethan nodded. "Know the risk. Just make sure she does too," Harlan replied, retreating inside. The journey back took longer, the added weight of supplies and deteriorating weather slowing his pace. By the time Ethan crested the final ridge overlooking Silver Moose Basin, afternoon shadows stretched long, and wet snow had begun to fall. Through the swirling flakes, the half-finished cabin was visible, corner posts standing like sentinels, the beginnings of walls taking shape. Beside it, a small wisp of smoke rose from Clara's shelter. Something loosened in Ethan's chest at the sight. She'd maintained the fire, as he taught her. As eyes approached, Clara emerged from her shelter, face brightening at his return. 3 days had passed since his departure. "You're back," she said, relief evident in her voice. Ethan set down his burdens. Said I would be. Her shelter had been further reinforced in his absence. He noticed additional branches woven more tightly, stones placed strategically to block wind. She learned quickly. I wasn't sure. With the snow coming, she admitted. Ethan nodded toward the cabin site. Any progress? Clara's chin lifted slightly. I sorted the cut logs by size like you showed me, and I've been stripping bark. She hesitated, then reached into her pocket and extended her hand. In her palm lay a small wooden button, roughly carved but recognizable. I found your spare shirt while gathering more branches for the shelter. It's missing a button. I made this one. Her cheeks colored slightly. It's not very. Ethan took the carved button, turning it over in his calloused fingers. The wood was smooth, the holes carefully bored through the center. It's good work, he said quietly. Thank you. He looked toward the darkening sky. Storm's coming in. We should secure what we can. Together, they covered the lumber with fir boughs to protect it from snow, then reinforced Clara's shelter further. As they worked, Ethan sensed a new confidence in her movements, small but growing, like the first green shoot after winter. Frost etched delicate patterns across the ground as December tightened its grip on Silver Moose Basin. The cabin wall stood nearly complete now, logs stacked and notched with growing skill, rising toward a roof still unbuilt. Each morning, Clara woke to find ice crystals formed inside her shelter. Beautiful and merciless reminders of the deepening winter. We need to hurry, Ethan said, his breath visible in the dawn light as they surveyed their progress. Next storm could be the big one. Clara nodded, hands tucked into the pockets of the coat he'd brought her from the trading post. Though still too large, it provided blessed warmth against the mountain cold. What comes next? She asked, studying the rectangular structure that would soon be her home. Windows and door, Ethan replied. A cabin without light is just a cave. He unrolled a piece of deer skin on which he'd drawn rough plans. Need glass for the windows. Good doors need proper hinges. Can't make those from forest materials. Clara frowned. Will we get such things? Ethan pointed westward. 2 days' journey. Old settlement that didn't survive its first winter. Buildings still standing, though abandoned. You'd go there in this weather. No choice. He traced the cabin's outline with a calloused finger. Need those materials before the pass closes completely. A knot of concern tightened in Clara's stomach. It's dangerous. Staying here without proper shelter is more dangerous. His gaze met hers direct and unflinching. Can you manage alone for a few days? The question carried weight beyond its simple words, a test of the skills he'd been teaching her, an acknowledgement of her growing capability. Yes, she said, trying to sound more confident than she felt. I've learned how to maintain the fire, check the snares. Ethan nodded, satisfied. I'll leave at first light tomorrow. Should return in 4 days if weather holds. That evening, he showed her how to stockpile firewood properly, how to protect her food cache from animals, and once again reviewed the signs of approaching storms. If it gets too cold in your shelter, he said, hesitating slightly, my cabin has strong walls, keys under the north cornerstone. The offer surprised her in all their weeks of work. He'd never invited her to his home, maintaining that careful distance that seemed as natural to him as breathing. Thank you, she said simply. Dawn brought clearing skies and bitter cold. Ethan departed with minimal supplies, traveling light for speed, and a promise to return as quickly as possible. The first day alone passed uneventfully. Clara checked her snares, finding one with a small rabbit. She prepared it as Ethan had taught her, wasting nothing. Storing the pelt to cure later, she worked on the cabin site, clearing fresh snow and covering the top logs with fir boughs for protection. The second day brought clouds again and a wind that cut through her shelter, despite all reinforcements. By evening, snow began to fall. Light at first, then with increasing intensity. Clara banked her fire carefully, adding the largest logs and huddled beneath every blanket she possessed. Throughout the night, the storm strengthened. Wind howled down from the mountain passes, driving snow through every tiny gap in her shelter. Despite her best efforts, the fire weakened, eventually dying to embers too small to provide meaningful heat. Dawn of the third day arrived as mere degrees of darkness rather than true light. Clara emerged from her shelter to find the world transformed, snow knee-deep already, and falling so heavily she could barely see the cabin site. Cold had settled into her bones during the night, a deep penetrating chill that simple movement couldn't dispel. She fought her way through drifts to gather more wood, rekindle her fire, but her fingers had grown clumsy with cold. The tinder wouldn't catch. Tears of frustration froze on her cheeks as she tried again and again. As morning crept toward noon with no break in the blizzard, Clara faced a difficult truth. Her shelter would not protect her through this storm. Ethan wasn't due back for at least another day, possibly longer if he'd been caught in this same weather. With numbing fingers, she gathered her few possessions. The journey to Ethan's cabin would be difficult in this weather, but she remembered his directions clearly. Follow the creek north until the lightning-struck fir, then east up the gentle slope. The trek that should have taken less than an hour stretched into a grueling ordeal. Twice she fell, struggling back to her feet with diminishing strength. The landmarks Ethan had described disappeared behind veils of white. Only stubborn determination kept her moving forward. When the dark shape of the cabin finally emerged from the swirling snow, Clara nearly wept with relief. Her fingers nearly useless with cold scrabble beneath the cornerstone Ethan had indicated. The key, a simple iron implement, felt like salvation in her palm. Inside the cabin was cold, but blessedly free of wind. A properly built stone fireplace dominated one wall. With the last of her energy, Clara managed to light a fire from Ethan's carefully prepared kindling. As warmth slowly returned to her body, she looked around at this private space she'd never expected to see. Simple, orderly, with touches of craftsmanship that spoke of care and patience, and on the rough-hewn table lay a square of glass. Not large, but clear and unbroken. Beside it, iron hinges obviously salvaged but still functional. Ethan had returned from his journey, found her gone, and continued on to his own cabin, which meant he would come looking for her. When the storm cleared, morning light filtered through the cabin's single window, waking Clara from the deepest sleep she'd had in months. For a moment, disorientation gripped her. The unfamiliar roof overhead, the solid walls surrounding her, then memory returned. The storm, her desperate journey through snow, finding Ethan's cabin. She sat up from the bearskin pallet near the hearth, noticing immediately that the fire had been tended recently. A pot of something steamed gently over carefully banked coals. "You're awake." Ethan's voice came from the doorway where he stood, arms full of split wood. Snow clung to his shoulders and hair. The storm broke just before dawn. He continued setting the wood beside the hearth path to your shelters completely buried. Clara pushed herself up, aware of the strangeness of being in his private space. "I couldn't keep the fire going in the shelter. I remembered what you said about your cabin." Ethan nodded, seemingly unsurprised by her decision. Good judgment. Would have frozen otherwise. He ladled stew from the pot into a wooden bowl and handed it to her. "Eat. Need strength for today. Today. Going to check the cabin site. See what the storm did." He glanced out the window. "When you're ready." The simple meal revitalized Clara, warming her from within. As they prepared to venture outside, Ethan handed her a pair of strange wooden frames with leather strappings. "Snowshoes," he explained. "Let you walk on top instead of sinking in." Clara fumbled with the unfamiliar contraptions until Ethan knelt before her, efficiently securing them to her boots. His hands moved with practiced ease, never lingering, maintaining that careful distance he always kept. "Like walking with canoes on your feet," he said, a rare hint of humor in his voice. "Takes practice." The journey to the cabin site proved challenging despite the snowshoes. Drifts had transformed the landscape, burying familiar landmarks beneath a pristine white blanket. When they finally reached the clearing, Clara gasped. The half-built cabin walls were barely visible, just the top logs showing above the snow. Worse than I thought, Ethan murmured, surveying the scene. Before they could begin digging out, movement at the forest edge caught their attention. Two figures on snowshoes emerged from the trees, approaching cautiously. Ethan straightened, hand moving instinctively to the knife at his belt. The strangers stopped at a respectful distance. One was clearly older, gray-streaked hair visible beneath a fur hat, while his companion appeared younger, perhaps Ethan's age. Both wore buckskins decorated with unfamiliar patterns and carried bows across their backs. The older man raised his hand in greeting, palm forward. "Oh, cabin builder," he called in accented English. Ethan returned the gesture. "Oh, hunters. We saw smoke from 2 fires in the basin," the older man explained. "Unusual came to my cabin," Ethan replied, pointing northward and building another here. The hunter's eyes shifted to Clara, curiosity evident but not unfriendly. "I am Greyhawk," the older man said. "This is my sister's son, Swiftwater. We hunt these mountains in winter." "Ethan Harper," Ethan replied. "And this is Clara Bennett." Greyhawk nodded, studying the half-buried cabin. "Building in winter is hard. Good walls already, though." Something in his tone suggested approval. Clara noticed Ethan's posture relaxing slightly. "Your woman is small for mountain life," Greyhawk observed, his gaze measuring Clara. "Not my woman," Ethan corrected. "Just helping with shelter." Swiftwater spoke for the first time, voice younger, but equally measured. "The small ones survive when they're clever, like foxes." Greyhawk gestured toward the cabin site. "Need help digging out?" The offer seemed to surprise Ethan. "Why would you help?" The older man's weathered face creased in a slight smile. "Winter is long." Stories of the cabin builder and the small girl already travel between camps. Better to know neighbors than wonder. After a moment's consideration, Ethan nodded. "Help will be welcome." Working together, the 4 of them made quick progress clearing snow from the cabin site. The Native American hunters moved with extraordinary efficiency, using wide bark scoops to displace snow. By midday, they'd uncovered the entire foundation and most of the wall structure. During a brief rest, Swiftwater approached Clara, something clutched in his gloved hand. "For you," he said, extending a small wooden carving. A fox, cleverly fashioned with alert eyes and a bushy tail. For the small one who survives despite the odds, Clara accepted the gift, turning it in her hands with wonder. "It's beautiful." "Thank you." Swiftwater nodded solemnly. Fox adapts, changes with seasons, never gives up. As afternoon shadows lengthened, Greyhawk and Swiftwater prepared to depart. "Storm damaged our camp," Greyhawk explained. "Need to rebuild before night." "When do you return to your people?" Ethan asked. "With spring thaw. Until then, we hunt these basins." The older man gestured to the cabin. "Roof needs strong center beam. Many hands make lighter work." Ethan understood the offer. Would welcome the help when time comes. As the hunters disappeared back into the forest, Clara clutched the carved fox. "They'll really come back to help?" she asked. Ethan nodded, already calculating new possibilities with unexpected allies. Mountain people keep their word whether they speak English or Shawnee. He glanced at the darkening sky. "We should head back. More work tomorrow." As they made their way through the snow, Clara realized that for the first time her world in these mountains was expanding beyond mere survival, beyond just herself and Ethan into something she hadn't expected to find. Community. "Hold it steady," Ethan instructed, positioning the long cedar shingle against the roof frame. Just like that, Clara braced herself on the ladder, arms trembling slightly with the effort of maintaining the precise angle Ethan required. January had arrived with alternating periods of clear, bitter cold, and heavy snowfall. During each break in the weather, they worked frantically on the cabin, racing against the season's harshest months still to come. The walls stood complete now, chinked with a mixture of clay and dry grass that Clara had prepared according to Ethan's directions. Window frames held the precious glass panes salvaged from the abandoned settlement. Only the roof remained unfinished, their most challenging task yet. "Good," Ethan said, driving in wooden pegs to secure the shingle. "Next one." Clara handed him another cedar plank, her movements more confident than they had been weeks ago. The work had changed her physically, her once soft hands now weathered and capable, her thin arms showing the first hints of wiry strength. "How many more?" she asked, glancing at the stack of shingles Ethan had split by hand. "Enough for today," he replied. "Storms coming by sunset." They developed an acute awareness of weather patterns, reading subtle signs in cloud formations, wind direction, and animal behavior. Survival depended on such knowledge. True to Ethan's prediction, the western sky darkened by mid-afternoon, heavy clouds building over the mountain ridges. They worked faster, securing as many shingles as possible before the approaching storm arrived. "Last one for today," Ethan declared, hammering the final wooden peg into place. Off the roof now, Clara descended the ladder carefully, muscles aching from hours of work. Nearly half the roof remained exposed, covered only by temporary fir boughs that would offer minimal protection against a heavy snowfall. "Will it hold?" she asked, concern evident in her voice. Ethan studied their work critically. "Partial roof's better than none," that he glanced at the threatening sky. "Might get rough tonight." They worked quickly to secure tools and remaining materials, covering the shingle stack with a deerskin weighted with stones. As the first fat snowflakes began to fall, they retreated to Ethan's cabin where Clara had continued to stay since the last major storm. The arrangement remained practical rather than personal. Ethan insisted she take the small bed built into one wall, while he slept on a pallet near the hearth. They maintained a careful separation of space that seemed important to them both, though neither spoke of it directly. By evening, the promised storm arrived with unexpected ferocity. Wind howled down from the high passes, rattling the cabin's sturdy walls and sending snow swirling through the smallest cracks. The fire roared in the stone hearth, requiring constant attention to maintain against the powerful draft. "Worst one yet," Ethan observed, adding another log to the flames. His normally impassive expression showed rare concern. Clara sat wrapped in a blanket, the carved fox figurine in her hands. She'd taken to carrying it as a talisman of sorts, a reminder of unexpected kindness in this harsh world. "Will my cabin survive?" she asked. "Walls are solid," Ethan replied. "It's the partial roof I'm worried about." As night deepened, the storm's intensity increased. Wind shrieked like a living thing, battering the cabin with relentless fury. Even Ethan's well-built shelter creaked under the assault. Just after midnight, a particularly violent gust shook the entire structure. Seconds later, a tremendous crack split the night. Louder than the wind, louder than thought. Ethan was on his feet instantly. "Lightning," he said grimly. "Too close." They waited in tense silence, listening to the storm's rage. No further unusual sounds followed, but Ethan remained alert, concern evident in his rigid posture. "Nothing to do until morning," he finally said, though his eyes stayed fixed on the window where snow pelted against glass. Dawn brought eerie calm. The storm had passed, leaving behind a transformed landscape of deep drifts and sculpted snow. As soon as light permitted, they made their way to Clara's cabin site. Ethan, breaking trail with his snowshoes while she followed in his tracks. The destruction was immediately apparent. A massive fir had fallen directly across the partially completed roof, crushing one corner of the structure. Roof shingles lay scattered across the snow, some split and broken beyond repair. Clara stood motionless, staring at the damaged cabin. All their work, all their careful planning reduced in a single night. All that effort, she whispered, unexpected tears threatening despite her best efforts to contain them. All for nothing. Ethan surveyed the damage with a critical eye. Already calculating, assessing structure still sound, he said finally, "Corner posts need replacing. Lost some shingles, but the roof. We rebuild," he interrupted firmly. Stronger this time. He knelt in the snow, extracting a broken shingle from the wreckage. One edge had been blackened and split where lightning had struck the fallen fir. "Keep this," he said, handing her the damaged wood. Reminder of what? Failure. Bitterness colored her voice. Ethan shook his head. Of persistence, he gestured to the cabin, still standing despite everything like you. He turned to study the fallen fir. "Good fortune in bad tree seasoned. Straight grain will make better shingles than what we had." Clara clutched the lightning-split shingle, its rough edges pressing against her palm. "How can you be so calm about starting over?" Ethan looked at her directly, his gaze steadier than she'd ever seen it. "Nothing worth having comes easy. Not in these mountains." He reached for his axe. "Besides, we're not starting over. We're continuing. A hearth is the soul of a cabin," Ethan explained, carefully arranging river stones in a semicircle. "Build it wrong. Smoke fills your home. Build it right. It'll warm you for decades." February had arrived with unexpected clemency. A stretch of clear, cold days that allowed them to make significant progress on rebuilding the storm-damaged cabin. The roof was now complete, constructed from a fallen fir and stronger for it. Walls stood firm despite the lightning strike, requiring only minor repairs. Now they focused on the interior, beginning with the all-important fireplace. "These stones," Ethan continued, selecting each piece with deliberate care, "need to fit together like puzzle pieces. No mortar can make up for poor placement." Clara watched his hands steady, sure, patient, as they tested each stone against its neighbors, turning, adjusting, sometimes discarding one for another. She'd grown to recognize the subtle signs that distinguished Ethan's teaching moments from mere work directions. When his voice took on this particular cadence, he was passing on knowledge he considered essential. "The hearth is more than warmth," it said, stepping back to assess the growing structure. "It's where food cooks, where water boils for washing, where wet clothes dry, center of living." Together, they worked through the morning, building the fireplace stone by stone. When the basic structure stood waist-high, Ethan pointed toward the nearby creek. "Need river clay, now, for sealing between stones." They walked together to the half-frozen waterway, Ethan leading them to a particular bend where the current had exposed a bank of reddish clay beneath the snow. With tools fashioned from deer antlers, they dug chunks of the sticky material, loading it into a rough-hewn wooden trough Ethan had carved for this purpose. "Clay alone cracks in heat," Ethan explained as they worked. "Need to mix with dried grass, makes it stronger." Back at the cabin, Clara learned the ancient skill of preparing proper clay mortar, kneading the stiff material until it became pliable, then working in carefully proportioned amounts of dried grass. The labor was demanding, requiring strength she wouldn't have possessed months earlier. "Good," Ethan approved, testing her mixture between calloused fingers, not too wet, not too dry. Using the prepared clay, they sealed between the fireplace stones, Ethan demonstrating the technique before guiding Clara's hands through the motion. His touch remained impersonal, instructive rather than intimate. Yet Clara found herself increasingly aware of his proximity. "Press firmly," he directed. "Clay needs to reach deep between stone." By late afternoon, the fireplace stood complete. A solid stone structure with a carefully constructed chimney that would draw smoke upward and outward. Ethan inspected their work with critical attention to detail, checking each sealed joint and connection. "Time to test it," he announced finally. They gathered kindling and smaller logs, arranging them with care in the new hearth. Ethan struck sparks into a nest of dried moss, blowing gently until flames caught and spread. They watched anxiously as the fire grew, eyes tracking the smoke's path. "Look," Clara whispered, pointing upward. Thin gray tendrils rose straight and true through the chimney, pulling cleanly out of the cabin rather than billowing inward. Ethan's expression remained impassive, but Clara had learned to recognize the slight relaxation around his eyes that signified satisfaction. "It works," she said, unable to keep wonder from her voice. "We did it. You did most of it," Ethan corrected, surprising her. "My hands just guided yours." The simple acknowledgement of her contribution meant more than elaborate praise might have. Ethan wasn't a man to offer empty compliments. As darkness fell, they continued working by firelight, now more determined than ever to complete the cabin's interior. The hearth's warm glow transformed the space, making it feel like a home rather than merely a shelter. Ethan showed Clara how to bank the fire properly to last through the night, carefully arranging larger logs over a bed of hot coals. "A good fire will still be alive come morning," he explained. "Just needs careful tending." When work finally ended for the day, they shared a simple meal of venison stew cooked over the new hearth. Their first food prepared in what would be Clara's home. It tastes different here, she observed, savoring the familiar flavors somehow enhanced by their surroundings. Ethan nodded. Food always tastes better in your own home. The casual reference to the cabin as her home, not just a shelter or a structure, resonated deep. For the first time since her abandonment, Clara felt a true sense of belonging, of place. "I think I'll stay here tonight," she said quietly. Ethan glanced up, surprise briefly visible before his expression returned to its usual reserve. "Cabin's not finished inside. No bed yet." "I have blankets," Clara replied, "and a hearth." After a moment's consideration, Ethan nodded. "Your choice. I'll be at my place if needed." As he prepared to leave, gathering his tools by the door, Clara spoke again. "Ethan," when he turned, she continued, "Thank you, not just for the cabin, but for teaching me." Something flickered across his face, a brief, unguarded moment, revealing emotions normally kept hidden. "You're a quick learner," he said simply. After Ethan departed, Clara arranged her blankets near the hearth, watching the play of firelight across the newly constructed walls. Outside, the mountain night settled cold and clear, stars brilliant in the black sky. But inside was warmth, security, and the profound satisfaction of creation. She slept that night in her own home, lulled by the gentle crackling of the fire she'd helped build, surrounded by walls she'd helped raise, beneath a roof she'd helped construct. No longer too small, too weak, too burdensome, just enough. The deepest part of winter settled over Silver Moose Basin, bringing days so cold that breath froze in midair and nights when the stars seemed brittle enough to shatter against the black sky. Outside work became impossible as temperatures plummeted, confining Clara to her newly completed cabin. The solitude might have been unbearable months earlier, but now she welcomed these quiet days, finding rhythm in necessary tasks and simple pleasures. Ethan still visited daily, trudging through snow drifts that sometimes reached his waist, bringing supplies, checking her fire, ensuring her safety. His visits grew shorter as winter intensified, limited by daylight and dangerous cold, but he never failed to appear a constant in a frozen world. On particularly brutal days, when even brief journeys became treacherous, he would arrive with snow crusted in his eyebrows, stay only long enough to help bring in firewood, then disappear again toward his own cabin. Their conversations during these brief encounters remained practical, focused on survival. Yet Clara found herself increasingly attuned to the nuances of his expressions, the rare moments when his guard lowered. "Teach me to carve," Clara requested during one such visit, when howling wind made the idea of Ethan's return journey particularly concerning. "If I'm to be stuck inside, I should learn something useful." Ethan considered her request, then nodded. From his pack, he produced a small knife and several pieces of fur already dried and prepared for working. "Start simple," he advised, demonstrating the basic techniques. How to hold the blade safely, how to follow a grain, how to visualize shape within formless material. What has its own ideas. Work with it, not against it. The lesson extended as the storm intensified outside, making departure impossible. For the first time, Ethan would need to stay through the night. They maintained their careful distance. Clara in the small bed built into the wall. Ethan on a pallet near the hearth. But the shared space felt different somehow. A boundary crossed without acknowledgement. In the days that followed, carving became Clara's passion, while snow piled against her cabin walls and wind moaned through the basin. She lost herself in the meditative process of revealing form from formlessness. Her early attempts were clumsy, misshapen lumps, bearing little resemblance to their intended subjects. But her hands, always deft with needlework, quickly adapted to this new skill. Ethan brought more wood on his visits, different types for different purposes, soft fir for practice, harder maple for durability, even precious cherry salvage from abandoned furniture. He offered corrections to her technique with the same matter-of-fact guidance he provided during cabin building, neither critical nor overly encouraging. "Your hands know things your mind doesn't yet," he observed, watching her work on a spoon. "Let them lead sometimes." Midwinter arrived, the calendar's deepest point of the cold season, though in the mountains spring remained a distant promise. In mountain tradition, Ethan had learned from his adoptive father. The day called for acknowledgement, a small celebration of survival and endurance. He arrived at Clara's cabin carrying a small package wrapped in deerskin. From his pack came rare treasures, coffee beans carefully rationed since his last trading post visit, and a small portion of precious sugar. Special day, he explained, setting these items by the hearth. Halfway point, days growing longer now, even if we can't yet tell. Clara prepared the coffee as he taught her, savoring the rich aroma that filled the small cabin. The normalcy of the moment, two people sharing warmth and simple luxury amid wilderness, struck her with unexpected poignancy. "I have something for you too," she said when they'd finished their coffee. From beneath her bed, she retrieved a bundle wrapped in cloth. Inside lay 3 wooden spoons carved over many days of patient work. Each featured a different design on the handle. Fir trees, mountains, stars, the details small but precisely rendered. "For your cabin," she explained, suddenly shy, "to replace the ones you've been using." Ethan took the spoons, examining each with careful attention. His calloused fingers traced the carved patterns, lingering over details most would overlook. "These are finely made," he said finally, a voice containing something Clara hadn't heard before. "Better than I could do. You taught me," she reminded him. "Showed you basics. This," he held up a spoon where mountain ridges had been carved with remarkable accuracy, "comes from your own seeing." The simple praise warmed her more than the fire. In the comfortable silence that followed, Clara realized how much had changed since those desperate days of early winter. Her hands, once soft and uncertain, now moved with confidence through daily tasks. Her body, once deemed too frail for mountain life, had strengthened through necessity and purpose. Most significantly, her spirit had transformed. Fear replaced by determination, helplessness by capability, abandonment by choice. The cabin stood as physical proof of this transformation. Every log and stone a testament to her unexpected resilience. Thinking deep thoughts, Ethan asked, noticing her contemplative silence. Clara smiled, the expression coming more easily than it once had. "Just wondering what spring will bring." Ethan nodded, understanding the question beneath her words. "Spring brings choices," he said simply. "New beginnings." Outside, snow continued to fall, but within the cabin's walls, something else entirely was taking root. The first wolf tracks appeared after 3 days of heavy snowfall. Clear impressions leading from the eastern ridge down toward the creek that ran behind Clara's cabin. Ethan discovered them during his morning patrol, a habit he developed during the harshest winter months, circling both cabins to check for signs of intruders, animal or human. "Need to be careful," he warned Clara, his breath visible in the frigid air as they stood examining the prints. "Bad winter drives them closer to settlements. Hunger makes them bold." Clara studied the tracks. 5-toed pads larger than her spread hand. Clear drag marks from heavy winter coats. "Will they attack?" "Not usually," Ethan replied, already scanning the tree line. "Prefer easier prey, but desperation changes behavior in wolves and people." That evening, howls echoed across the basin for the first time, distant at first, then gradually closer. The haunting sounds sent primal shivers down Clara's spine. Despite the solid walls surrounding her, "They're communicating," Ethan explained as they listened from the relative safety of her cabin. "Coordinating the hunt for us." Clara couldn't keep apprehension from her voice. Ethan shook his head. "For deer, most likely, but we need to prepare anyway." Over the next days, he taught Clara to recognize warning signs, tracks too close to the cabin, carcasses left in the open, sudden silence from smaller forest creatures. He showed her how to create simple alarms, strings of bells that would sound if anything large approached during the night. Most important lesson, Ethan emphasized, checking her supply of firewood is never show fear. "Wolves smell it. Makes you seem like prey." Clara nodded, absorbing this wisdom like all his previous lessons with determined attention. "What we do if they come too close?" "Make ourselves bigger, louder than we are," Ethan demonstrated, raising his arms and producing a sharp, authoritative sound, unlike his usual quiet tones. Most will back away. They're cautious by nature. Most, Claire questioned. In every pack, there's usually one that tests boundaries. Ethan admitted. That's the dangerous one. The wolf presence increased as February waned. Tracks appeared more frequently, circling closer to the cabin. Occasionally, Clara would glimpse shadows moving between trees at dusk, gray forms ghosting through the forest with fluid grace. Ethan began staying overnight more often, sleeping on the pallet near her hearth rather than risking the journey to his own cabin after dark. They maintained their careful routines, separate spaces, respectful boundaries. But Clara found comfort in his steady presence as wolf howls pierced the night. The confrontation came without warning on a clear afternoon. Clara had ventured just beyond her doorway to collect firewood from the stacked pile when movement caught her eye. Not 20 paces away, a large gray wolf stood watching her. Its amber eyes, unnervingly intelligent fear, froze her momentarily. The wood clutched, forgotten in her arms, breath caught in her throat. The wolf's ears pricked forward, assessing, calculating. Clara, Ethan's voice came from just inside the cabin doorway, deliberately calm. Don't run. Move slowly toward me. She forced herself to breathe, to remember his lessons. With measured steps, she began backing toward the door, maintaining eye contact with the predator. The wolf took a step forward, then another, closing the distance between them. Make yourself big now, Ethan instructed, his own arms raising as he moved to her side. Together, they stretched upward. Ethan, producing that sharp, commanding sound, while Clara forced herself to shout, something she'd rarely done in her life. For a tense moment, the outcome hung in balance. The wolf stood its ground, seemingly undecided. Then, from the forest edge, more shapes emerged. 3 additional wolves materializing like smoke among the trees. Inside, Ethan said quietly, one hand reaching for the axe, leaning against the cabin wall. Slow. Before they could retreat, the lead wolf lunged forward, not attacking directly, but testing, challenging. Ethan swung the axe in a wide arc, the blade catching sunlight as it cut through air just feet from the animal's muzzle. The wolf jumped back, startled by the unexpected response. Ethan advanced a step, swinging again with controlled precision. Clara, finding courage from his example, grabbed a burning branch from the hearth just inside the door and thrust it forward, the flames creating a barrier of heat and light. Confronted with fire and steel, the wolves hesitated. After several tense seconds, the leader turned away, trotting back toward its pack with affected nonchalance. One by one, they disappeared into the forest, though their retreat felt more like postponement than surrender. When the last wolf vanished, Clara's knees nearly buckled with delayed reaction. Ethan steadied her with a hand on her shoulder, a rare physical contact that spoke volumes about the danger they'd faced. They'll be back, he said, eyes still scanning the tree-line. Pack that size needs substantial food. That night, they reinforced Clara's door with additional bracing and kept the fire burning higher than usual. Ethan fashioned makeshift torches from fir branches soaked in animal fat. Emergency weapons if needed. Were you afraid? Clara asked as they sat by the hearth, the question escaping before she could reconsider. Ethan was silent for so long she thought he might not answer. Finally, he nodded once. Only fools feel no fear in wolf country. Courage isn't absence of fear, it's acting. Despite from his pocket, he produced a small object, a wolf's tooth on a leather cord. From last winter, he explained. Similar situation, different outcome. Keep it. Clara accepted the unexpected gift, feeling the sharp point against her palm. A tangible reminder of danger faced and overcome. A reminder, Ethan said, echoing her thoughts, that fear faced becomes courage. Ethan's illness began with a cough, subtle at first, barely noticeable amid their daily tasks. By evening, it had deepened into something more concerning, a harsh rattle that punctuated their quiet conversation by the fire. Clara glanced at him with growing worry, recognizing the glazed brightness in his eyes that often signaled fever. "You're sick," she said simply, moving to place a hand on his forehead. Ethan pulled back from her touch, an instinctive reaction to the intimacy. "Just tired, needs sleep." But by morning, denial became impossible. He arrived at her cabin later than usual, his normally steady gait uneven, face flushed despite the bitter cold. When he stumbled, crossing the threshold, Clara moved quickly to support him. Propriety forgotten in the face of necessity. She commanded with unexpected authority, guiding him to the chair by the hearth. "Let me look at you." Too weak to resist, Ethan submitted to her examination. Fever radiated from his skin, and his breathing had grown labored overnight. Familiar dread gripped Clara's heart. The same fear she'd known watching family members sicken during harsh winters past. "How long have you felt this way?" she asked, placing a cool cloth against his forehead. "Started yesterday," he admitted reluctantly. "Thought it would pass." Clara recognized the illness immediately. Mountain fever, her grandmother had called it, a dangerous affliction that struck during the coldest months, often proving fatal to the isolated and vulnerable. Without thinking, she reached for the carved fox figurine in her pocket, fingers tracing its familiar contours as her mind raced through memories. "You need to lie down," she insisted, already preparing her bed. Ethan shook his head. "Should get back to my cabin. Don't want a burden." "Stop," Clara interrupted firmly. "You've cared for me all winter. Now it's my turn." The simplicity of her declaration silenced his protest. When she guided him toward the bed, he followed without further resistance. His usual self-sufficiency surrendered to necessity. Once Ethan settled into uneasy sleep, Clara tied her warmest shawl around her shoulders and ventured outside. The forest in deep winter held dangers, but also remedies if one knew where to look. Her grandmother had taught her well, passing down knowledge of healing plants through quiet lessons beside the hearth. Moving with newfound confidence through knee-deep snow, Clara sought specific trees and bushes. From beneath the snow, she carefully dug for dormant roots. From evergreen branches, she collected needles still rich with hidden properties. Each ingredient went in her gathering basket, a mental inventory checked and rechecked against half-remembered instructions. By the time she returned, Ethan's fever had worsened. He tossed restlessly on the narrow bed, mumbling incoherently between harsh coughs. Clara worked quickly, crushing fir needles to release their potent oils, scraping inner bark from willow branches, steeping dry berries she'd preserved from autumn. Throughout the day and into night, she tended him with single-minded focus, cooling his fever with snow-dampened cloths, helping him sip medicinal teas, monitoring each labored breath. When delirium took him, she spoke soothingly, her voice a steady anchor in his fevered confusion. "My mother," he murmured during one lucid moment, eyes finding hers through the haze of illness. "She used to sing when I was sick. I don't know many songs," Clara admitted, wringing out another cloth. "But I could tell you a story." Ethan nodded weakly, and Clara began recounting tales her grandmother had shared. Stories of mountain spirits and clever animals, of stars that guided lost travelers home, of small creatures that survived against impossible odds. She spoke until her voice grew hoarse, until Ethan's breathing steadied into something approaching normal sleep. For 3 days, the pattern continued, brief periods of lucidity interrupted by fever and coughing. Clara barely slept, catching moments of rest in the chair beside the bed, always alert for any change in his condition. She prepared poultices of fir resin mixed with crushed roots, binding them to his chest to ease breathing. She brewed teas of increasing potency, measuring improvement in small increments. On the 4th morning, Clara woke from an inadvertent doze to find Ethan watching her, his gaze clear for the first time in days. "You're still here," he said, voice weak but present. "Where else would I be?" she replied, moving to check his forehead. The fever had broken sometime in the night. "You saved my life," Ethan stated simply. Clara shook her head. "I just knew what plants to use. My grandmother taught me the only useful thing my family ever gave me. Not just the medicine." Ethan clarified, "The care." He glanced around at the evidence of her vigilance. The the basket of medicinal plants, the pot of healing tea, the pile of cloths beside the bed. No one's tended me since I was a child. Something in his tone, a vulnerability never before revealed, made Clara pause in her tasks. She realized suddenly that their roles had fundamentally shifted. The capable builder who had rescued her from certain death now depended on her strength, her knowledge. Rest, she instructed gently. You'll need time to recover. In the days that followed, Ethan's improvement continued steadily. Though still weak, he insisted on helping with small tasks, whittling kindling for the fire, directing Clara on cabin maintenance he couldn't yet perform himself. During long evenings by the hearth, he spoke more of his past than he ever had before. Childhood memories surfacing like treasures long buried. Clara listened, recognizing the gift of his trust as she organized her medicinal plants into a proper bundle for future use. She reflected on the strangeness of their journey, how her supposed weakness had become unexpected strength, how abandonment had led to belonging. The first whisper of spring arrived unexpectedly, not as warming temperatures or melting snow, but as sound. Clara woke one morning in early March to an unfamiliar noise outside her cabin window. Opening the shutters, she discovered a small brown bird perched on a nearby branch, its song bright and insistent against winter's lingering silence. First Robin, Ethan observed, joining her at the window. Though still recovering from his illness, he'd regained enough strength to move between their cabins. No longer confined to Clara's care. Always returns before the thaw. Knows what's coming before we do. Clara watched the bird with wonder. How can it survive? There's still snow everywhere. Finds what others miss, Ethan replied. Sees beneath the surface. In the days that followed, they began noticing other subtle changes. A different quality to the light. A slight softening of snow on south-facing slopes, the occasional drip from icicles hanging from the eaves. Winter's grip, though still firm, showed the first signs of weakening. Ethan grew stronger with each passing day, his natural vitality returning alongside the season's gradual shift. Together, they resumed work on the cabin's interior, crafting a small table from fir boards, fashioning pegs for hanging clothing and tools, improving the stone hearth with a proper cooking surface. Come spring, you should plant a garden, Ethan suggested as they completed the day's tasks. Southside gets good sun, soil's rich there. The casual reference to future plans hung between them, raising unspoken questions about what would come next. With winter's immediate threats receding, their arrangement born of necessity and survival seemed increasingly undefined. I don't know anything about gardening, Clara admitted, uncertain how to address the larger implications. Not hard to learn, Ethan replied with characteristic simplicity. Seeds want to grow, just need proper tending. Before she could respond, a distant sound drew their attention. The jingle of harness bells, alien and startling. After months of isolation, Ethan moved immediately to the door, hand instinctively reaching for his rifle. Someone's coming, he said, scanning the tree line where a crude trail connected to the main pass. Stay inside. Ignoring his directive, Clara joined him on the small porch they'd constructed, once weather permitted. Together, they watched as a horse-drawn wagon emerged from the forest, moving carefully through remnant snow. At the reins sat a burly figure Clara didn't recognize, but Ethan relaxed slightly. Harlan, he identified from the trading post. The wagon approached slowly, eventually stopping before the cabin. Harlan Whitaker, his weathered face partially hidden beneath a thick beard, surveyed their work with undisguised curiosity. So it's true, he called by way of greeting. Harper actually built someone cabin. Ethan nodded acknowledgement, but offered no explanation. Early for the past to be clear. Not clear exactly, Harlan replied, climbing stiffly from the wagon. Possible for those desperate enough or fool enough. He glanced toward Clara, who stood half-hidden behind Ethan. Figured you two might be running low on supplies after that winter. From the wagon bed, he produced several burlap sacks, flour, coffee, salt, basics to tide you over until regular trading resumes. Didn't ask for charity, Ethan said, though his tone lacked genuine resistance. Harlan snorted. Call investment. Basin's good grazing land. Been thinking about running some cattle here come summer. He nodded toward the cabin. Good to know someone's keeping an eye on things. As Ethan helped unload the supplies, Harlan wandered toward the garden site they discussed earlier. From his pocket, he withdrew a small cloth pouch. Seed potatoes, he explained, handing them to Clara. Easy to grow, even for beginners. Plant them soon as the ground thaws. His gaze swept the surrounding area, assessing. Every new home needs growing things. The phrase new home registered with Clara, affirming what the cabin had become. No longer merely shelter against immediate danger, but a permanent dwelling, a place of belonging. After helping store the unexpected provisions, Harlan declined their offer of coffee, citing the need to return before nightfall. As he prepared to depart, he paused, studying them with shrewd eyes. People talking about you too? He mentioned casually. The abandoned girl and her silent builder making bets on whether you'll stay once spring comes proper. People talk too much, Ethan replied evenly. Harlan shrugged. Nature of folks, especially isolated ones. He climbed back into his wagon. Word is a family in Clearwater 3 Basins overtelling everyone their daughter died on the journey. The information struck Clara like a physical blow. Though she'd suspected her family had fabricated some explanation for her absence, hearing the specifics that they declared her dead rather than merely left behind, reopened wounds she'd thought healed. Ethan's gaze found hers, gauging her reaction. That changed things for you. The question contained layers of meaning beyond its simple words. Was she now considering seeking out her family? Did knowing their whereabouts alter her plans? Clara considered carefully before answering. No, she said finally. They chose their path. I found mine. As Harlan's wagon disappeared back into the forest, Ethan and Clara stood together on the porch, the seed pouch clutched in her hands. A tangible promise of seasons to come. What will you plant besides potatoes? Ethan asked his quiet question, bridging present circumstances to future possibilities. Clara looked out over the basin, imagining the snow-covered ground transformed by summer growth. Everything that will take root, she replied. Certainty growing within her like the first green shoots beneath winter soil. A proper door does more than keep out weather. Ethan explained as they positioned the heavy wooden structure into the frame. It marks boundary, says this is home, not just shelter. April had arrived with its characteristic unpredictability. Days of warming sunshine interspersed with sudden snowfall. Freezing nights giving way to thawing afternoons. The mountain spring unfolded in fits and starts. Reluctant yet inevitable. The cabin door represented their final major construction task. Throughout winter, Clara had used a temporary covering of hides and canvas, functional but incomplete. Now, with improved weather allowing for travel, Ethan had suggested a journey to the nearest settlement where a proper blacksmith operated. Need iron hinges, he'd explained. Door that heavy needs metal. Not the 2-day journey marked Clara's first significant venture beyond the basin since her abandonment months earlier. Though still recovering from winter's deprivations, she found herself stronger than expected, able to maintain a steady pace beside Ethan as they traversed lingering snow fields and muddy trails. The settlement, little more than a cluster of rough buildings surrounding a crossroads, had proven both fascinating and overwhelming after a long isolation. People stared openly at the slight young woman accompanying the taciturn mountain man. Everyone knew by reputation, if not acquaintance. Whispers followed them from the general store to the blacksmith's forge. That must be her, the abandoned girl, the one Harper built a cabin for. Clara had held her head high, meeting curious gazes directly. Let them stare. Let them wonder. She was no longer the helpless creature left to die in winter's grip. The blacksmith, a massive man with forearms like tree trunks, had studied Ethan's hand-drawn specifications with grudging respect. Good design, solid. Who taught you building necessity? Ethan had answered simply. Now, after their return journey, they worked together, positioning the door into the carefully constructed frame. The hinges, hand-forged black iron, contrasted beautifully against the golden fur. Clara ran her fingers over their rough surface, appreciating both functionality and craftsmanship. Perfect fit, she observed as Ethan made final adjustments. He nodded, satisfaction evident in his usually impassive expression. Measured twice, cut once. The door swung freely on its new hinges, opening inward to reveal the cabin's completed interior. Simple but thoughtfully arranged, every element serving both practical function and aesthetic harmony. The hearth dominated one wall, its stone face now adorned with small shelves for cooking implements. A table and 2 chairs occupied the center space. The built-in bed with its fresh fur frame nestled comfortably in the corner. What had begun as mere survival shelter had evolved into a true home, its creation a testament to perseverance and shared purpose. Just one thing missing, Ethan said, reaching into his pack. He withdrew a small object wrapped in leather, offering it to Clara with uncharacteristic hesitation. She unwrapped the package carefully to reveal an iron latch more elaborate than strictly necessary for function, its surface etched with a simple pattern of fir branches. Blacksmith's wife added the design. Ethan explained, sounding almost apologetic. Said a woman's door should have something beautiful alongside the practical. Clara traced the pattern with her fingertip. It's perfect. Together they installed the latch, Ethan demonstrating how the mechanism worked. Simple but effective, designed to secure from inside. When completed, he stepped back, allowing Clara to test it herself. A door means I choose who enters and who doesn't, she said softly, understanding the deeper significance of this final addition. Ethan nodded. Your cabin now, truly yours. The words brought unexpected emotion. Clara looked around at the structure they'd built together. Walls that had risen log by log through bitter cold and driving snow. A roof that had weathered lightning and storm. A hearth that had provided warmth and sustenance through the darkest winter days. And now a door, not just an entrance, but a choice. Not just protection, but autonomy. We should celebrate, she decided impulsively. Mark the occasion. From her stores, Clara produced the last of the coffee Harlan had brought, a luxury saved for special moments. As she prepared it over the fire, Ethan sat at the table, uncharacteristically relaxed in the comfortable silence between them. People at the settlement, Clara said eventually, pouring the steaming liquid into carved wooden cups. They had questions in their eyes about us. Ethan accepted his cup without comment, though something flickered across his features, acknowledgement of the unspoken curiosity they'd encountered. Does it bother you? She asked. What they might think. He considered her question with typical thoroughness. No, he answered finally. People need simple stories to explain what they don't understand and what don't they understand. Ethan's gaze met hers directly. That some things don't need explaining, they just are. The simplicity of his response settled between them like a shared truth. Outside, afternoon light cast long shadows through the new doorway, open now to spring air, but capable of closing against the world when needed. To doors, Clara said, raising her cup slightly, and the freedom to open or close them. Ethan nodded, the barest hint of a smile, touching his usually solemn expression. And to those strong enough to build their own, may transform Silver Moose Basin with astonishing swiftness. Snow retreated to high ridges, surrendering lower ground to explosive greenery. Wildflowers carpeted meadows in brilliant patches, purple lupin, golden balsam root, delicate white columbine. Along creek beds, tender willows unfurled pale green leaves that trembled in spring breezes. The cabin stood complete now, weathering its first seasonal transition. Its logs had settled and tightened, as Ethan predicted. The chinking hardened to proper firmness. A small tendril of wild violet had somehow taken root beside the doorstep, its unexpected presence delighting Clara each morning. With the cabin finished, their shared purpose had technically ended. Yet Ethan continued to visit daily. His arrivals grew less predictable as he returned to his regular pattern of hunting and trapping. But rarely did a day pass without him appearing, often bearing small offerings, early berries, trout from the stream. Once a handful of wild onions discovered on a south-facing slope, their interactions had developed an unspoken rhythm, comfortable yet carefully bounded. They worked side by side, preparing Clara's garden plot, turning the rich basin soil and planting the seed potatoes Harlan had provided. Ethan showed her how to construct a simple fence of woven branches to protect tender shoots from deer and rabbits. "You're becoming a proper mountain woman," he observed one afternoon as she efficiently skinned a rabbit caught in her own snare. The comment, delivered in his matter-of-fact manner, carried more weight than elaborate praise might have. Clara smiled, recognizing how far she'd come from the helpless girl abandoned months earlier. Her hands, once soft and uncertain, now moved with practiced confidence through daily tasks. Her body had strengthened, no longer trembling with the effort of basic chores. Most significantly, fear had given way to capability. The constant dread of inadequacy replaced by quiet self-assurance. "Thanks to you," she replied. Ethan shook his head slightly. "Showed you basics came from your own determination." Their conversation was interrupted by an unexpected sound, the creaking of wagon wheels approaching along the crude trail from the main pass. Both turned toward the noise, watching as a family's wagon emerged from the tree-line. The travelers, a weather-beaten man driving the team, a woman beside him, and 3 children peering curiously from the back, pulled to a stop when they spotted the cabin. "Ho, there," the man called, raising a hand in greeting. "Didn't expect to find folks settled in this basin." Ethan moved forward, positioning himself slightly ahead of Clara in a subtly protective stance. "Just 2 cabins, plenty of basin left." The man nodded, assessing the surrounding landscape with obvious interest. Heading west to the Oregon Territory. Trails blocked by late snow on the high pass. Scouts said this basin might offer passage around Northern Ridge, provides alternate route. Ethan confirmed. Passable now, though barely. Relief washed over the travelers' faces. The woman, looking exhausted from what had clearly been a difficult journey, smiled tentatively at Clara. "Might we trouble you for fresh water?" she asked. "Children are parched, and our barrels running low." Clara stepped forward, moving past Ethan with quiet confidence. "Of course, I'll fetch some now." As she filled their water containers from a rain barrel, the family climbed down from their wagon to stretch tired limbs. The children, 2 boys and a girl, ranging from perhaps 5 to 10 years, stared at Clara with undisguised curiosity. "Are you really living out here all alone?" the oldest boy asked. "Tommy, mind your manners," his mother scolded. Clara smiled. "I have my own cabin," she answered, gesturing to the structure behind her and neighbors nearby. She glanced toward Ethan, who stood talking with the father about trail conditions. The mother moved closer, helping Clara with the water. "It's unusual to see a young woman in such a remote place," she observed, her tone careful but curious. "Most girls your age would be terrified." Something in her words, the casual assumption that fear would be the natural female response to wilderness, stirred unexpected emotion in Clara. "I was afraid once," she admitted. "Not anymore." Their conversation turned to practical matters. Gardening possibilities, weather patterns, preservation methods for winter food stores. The woman shared tips learned during their long journey west, while Clara offered information about local plant resources gleaned from her months in the basin. As the family prepared to continue their journey, the father approached Ethan again, their discussion having clearly extended beyond mere trail directions. "My wife's got family in a settlement called Clearwater." He mentioned 3 basins over, said we should stop there for supplies before the final push west. The casual reference sent an unexpected chill through Clara. Clearwater, where her own family had settled after abandoning her, where they had told everyone she was dead. Ethan's eyes sought hers across the yard, gauging her reaction to this coincidental connection. "Good people in Clearwater?" he asked the traveler, his tone deliberately neutral. The man shrugged. "Like anywhere I expect. Some good, some not. Wife's sister married a Bennett there. Farmer family that came in last fall. Doing well from the letters we've received." Bennett, her family name spoken so casually by the stranger. They were prospering. Apparently, their new life untroubled by the daughter they'd sacrificed to winter's mercy. After the travelers departed, promised aid from Ethan in crossing the northern ridge. A heavy silence fell between them. "You all right?" Ethan finally asked, watching her carefully. Clara plucked the small violet growing beside her doorstep, twirling it gently between her fingers. "They declare me dead," she said softly. "Started over as if I never existed. Does that change things for you, knowing they're so close?" She considered his questions seriously, examining her feelings with the same careful attention she now gave to all important matters. "I'm not a ghost," she said finally, voice strengthening with conviction. "I'm here living. Their lie doesn't change that." Ethan nodded, seemingly satisfied with her response. As evening approached, he prepared to return to his own cabin as usual. At the edge of the clearing, he paused, looking back at her. "People make their choices," he said simply. "You've made yours. Seems to me you chose better than they did." Summer settled over Silver Moose Basin like a warm blanket, bringing long days of golden sunlight and short nights filled with cricket song. Clara's garden flourished in the rich soil. Potato plants sending up sturdy green stems while neat rows of turnips and carrots, seeds provided by the traveling family promised future harvests. Wild berries ripened in forest clearings, their abundance almost overwhelming after winter scarcity. Ethan continued his daily visits, though their purpose had shifted. No longer driven by survival necessity, they now worked on refinements. A small table for Clara's porch, shelves for storing preserved foods, a comfortable chair sized perfectly for her smaller frame. Each project emerged from Ethan's hands with increasing artistry, his practical craftsmanship evolving to include decorative elements. "Thought you might want proper furniture," he explained one morning, arriving with tools and several boards of carefully dried fur. "Winter evenings are long. Should have comfortable places to sit." They worked together throughout the day, Clara handling the finer detail work while Ethan managed heavier cutting and joinery. By evening, a handsome chair took shape, its proportions tailored precisely to Clara's size. "It's beautiful," she said, running her hand along the smoothly sanded armrest. "Too nice for everyday use." Ethan shook his head. Beauty and function belong together. No point in making something that lasts if it doesn't please the eye. His philosophy, expressed so rarely in words, but consistently in actions, resonated deeply with Clara. The cabin itself embodied this principle, sturdy yet graceful, practical yet welcoming, a perfect balance of necessity and comfort. Their comfortable routine was interrupted one brilliant July morning by the arrival of visitors, a young couple with a small child traveling in a wagon loaded with household possessions. "Pardon the intrusion," the man called as they approached, his manner respectful but determined. "We're looking to settle in this region. Heard there might be unclaimed land in this basin." Ethan emerged from the cabin where he'd been working, wiping sawdust from his hands. "Plenty of basin unclaimed," he confirmed, studying the newcomers with his usual careful assessment. The young woman, cradling an infant no more than a few months old, looked exhausted but hopeful. "We've traveled from Tennessee," she explained, looking for a fresh start. "James is a carpenter by trade," her husband added, "and Sarah here knows medicinal herbs better than any doctor." Clara stepped forward, her initial wariness giving way to interest. "You know healing plants?" Sarah nodded, shifting her baby to her other arm. "My grandmother taught me, brought as many seeds and cuttings as I could carry." An unexpected connection formed instantly between the women. A shared knowledge, a common language of roots and leaves and healing properties. As the men discussed potential building sites farther down the basin, Clara invited Sarah inside, offering cool water and a comfortable place to nurse her child. "Your cabin is beautiful," Sarah observed, looking around with appreciation. "Did you build it yourselves?" "Ethan built it for me," Clara explained. "I was stranded here last autumn. He taught me to survive the winter." Understanding passed between them, woman to woman. No further explanation needed. Sarah nodded, her eyes reflecting compassion without pity. "And now," she asked simply. Clara considered the question. "Now I'm building a life, learning something new each day." "Is he your husband?" Sarah inquired, nodding toward the door where Ethan could be seen talking with James. "No," Clara replied. "Just Ethan." The inadequacy of the description hung in the air, highlighting the undefined nature of their relationship. By evening, decisions had been made. The newcomers would build their cabin a quarter-mile downstream, close enough for community, yet distant enough for privacy. Noah offered to help James with initial construction, while Sarah eagerly accepted Claire's invitation to share gardening knowledge. After the couple departed to make temporary camp at their chosen site, Ethan unrolled a piece of deerskin on Claire's table. With charcoal, he sketched a simple map of the basin, marking both their cabins and the newcomers' intended location. Basins changing, he observed, adding the creek and major landmarks to his drawing. Won't be just as much longer. Clara studied the map, noting the careful detailing of the land between their separate dwellings. The path now worn through daily travel, the distinctive lightning-struck fir that served as halfway marker, the small meadow where wildflowers grew in particular abundance. "Does that bother you?" she asked. Having others nearby, Ethan considered the question with characteristic thoroughness. "Change is natural," he said finally. "Basins fill empty, fill again nature's way," and thus the question escaped before Clara could reconsider its implications. Ethan's gaze lifted from the map to meet hers steady and unguarded. "That's for you to decide." He rolled the map carefully, securing it with a thin strip of leather. "For you," he said, handing her the completed drawing. To know the land, as it is now, before more changes come, the gift, practical yet personal, represented something beyond mere geography. It acknowledged their shared history, while recognizing uncertain future paths. Two cabins connected by a visible trail, separate yet linked through choice rather than necessity. As Ethan departed for his own home in the gathering dusk, Clara stood in her doorway, watching until his familiar figure disappeared into the trees. The basin stretched before her, beautiful in summer abundance, no longer a place of abandonment, but of deliberate presence. The map lay on her table, a testament to both connection and independence, the territory between solitude and belonging, carefully charted, but ultimately undefined. Autumn painted Silver Moose Basin in brilliant hues. Aspen trees shimmering gold against evergreen slopes. Wild rose hips burning crimson along creek beds. Blueberry bushes transformed into copper flames. The season brought crisp mornings and shortened days. Nature's gentle reminder that winter would return, requiring preparation and foresight. Clara worked steadily through these golden days, harvesting her garden's bounty and preserving what she could for the coming months. The potatoes yielded surprisingly well, their harvest filling 2 wooden crates. Ethan had crafted specifically for root storage. Berries became preserves. Herbs were dried in careful bundles. Meat was smoked and stored according to methods learned through necessity and refined through practice. Ethan's cabin underwent similar preparations, though his established skills made the process more efficient. Together, they helped James and Sarah secure their new home against approaching cold, sharing knowledge that had sustained them through the previous winter. "You have neighbors now." The simple statement acknowledged how much had changed in a year. What had begun as 2 isolated individuals facing desperate circumstances had evolved into the beginnings of community. 4 adults and 1 child bound by shared geography and mutual support. On a particularly splendid October afternoon, Ethan arrived at Clara's cabin carrying an unusual burden. 2 newly finished chairs, their design matching the one he'd made for her months earlier, yet each distinctly unique in subtle details. "One for each cabin," he explained, setting them side by side on her porch. "Winter's coming. Both need proper seating." Clara examined the chairs, noting the careful differences. One featured delicate carved mountain peaks along its back, while the other displayed a pattern of fir branches similar to her door latch. Both showed extraordinary craftsmanship far beyond mere functionality. "They're beautiful," she said, running her fingers over the smooth wood. "Which is which?" Ethan hesitated, an unusual uncertainty crossing his normally decisive features. "That's what I came to ask," he admitted. "Been thinking about the approaching winter, about arrangement." The unspoken question hung between them. Would they continue their separate living as established, Or would circumstances change with the season's turn? The previous winter had forced certain practical decisions, survival taking precedence over propriety. Now, with basic needs secured, other considerations emerged. Clara sat in one of the new chairs, feeling how perfectly it accommodated her smaller frame. "I've been thinking too," she said carefully, "about what happens when snow comes." Ethan remained standing, his posture reflecting the tension he rarely expressed in words. "Last winter we made choices based on necessity. This winter we have options." The conversation they'd avoided for months could no longer be postponed. With characteristic directness, Ethan continued, "I built you this cabin so you could have independence, your own place. Wouldn't want to undermine that purpose." Clara considered his words, understanding the deeper concern beneath his practical statement. "The cabin gave me more than shelter," she replied. "It gave me confidence. Show me I wasn't too small or too weak to survive." She rose from the chair, moving to stand before him. "I'm not afraid of dependence anymore. I've learned the difference between needing help and being helpless." Ethan nodded, his gaze steadier than she'd ever seen it. "And I've learned there's strength in building something besides walls." The simple acknowledgement, profound, coming from a man of such careful speech, shifted something fundamental between them without elaborate declaration or dramatic gesture. They recognized a mutual understanding that had developed alongside the cabin's construction. "So what do we do?" Clara asked practically about winter arrangements. Ethan glanced at the two chairs, symbols of their separate yet connected lives. "Winter comes. We each have our own path," he said slowly. "But the path between stays clear." The compromise, neither complete separation nor premature union, felt right to them both. A choice made consciously rather than forced by circumstance. "Which chair goes where?" Clara asked, returning to the immediate question. Ethan considered for a moment, then pointed to the one with carved mountains. "This one stays here. Reminds you of what surrounds us." He touched the fir branch pattern on the second chair. "This one comes to my cabin. Reminds me of your door." Of choices freely made. As evening approached, they worked together, preparing both cabins for the season ahead. Banking firewood, checking roof seams, securing shutters against coming storms. Their movements had developed a comfortable synchronicity, each anticipating the other's needs without discussion. When work finished, they stood between their respective homes, the worn path connecting them visible even in fading light. "Winter will be different this time," Clara observed, watching the first stars appear above mountain ridges. Ethan nodded, his expression peaceful despite the challenges ahead. "Everything's different now." The statement encompassed far more than seasonal change. It acknowledged their personal transformations, the growth that had occurred alongside the cabin's construction. What winter had begun, autumn would continue, the careful building of something meant to endure beyond mere survival. "Good night, Ethan," Clara said simply, turning toward her door. "Until tomorrow," he replied, his words both farewell and promise. Between their cabins, the path remained, neither imposing obligation nor preventing choice, but offering possibility. 1 year had passed since Clara Bennett found herself abandoned in Silver Moose Basin, left behind by family who deemed her too small, too frail for the journey ahead. Now, on this crisp November morning, she stood on her cabin porch, watching thin wisps of wood smoke rise from the chimney and disappear into the clear mountain air. The cabin had weathered its first full cycle of seasons. Its logs darkened to a rich amber by sun and rain. Its roof proven against storms both summer and winter. Inside, shelves held preserved foods from Clara's garden, evidence of planning capability, and hope. Dried herbs hung in neat bundles from ceiling beams, filling the space with comforting fragrance. A proper bed, table, chairs, and cookware transformed what might have been mere shelter into genuine home. Thinking deep thoughts, Ethan's voice drew her attention to where he approached along the familiar path between their cabins. He carried something wrapped in oiled leather, his expression holding the quiet contentment that had gradually replaced his earlier reserve. "Remembering," Clara replied, making room for him on the porch step. "It was 1 year ago today." Ethan nodded, understanding without elaboration. The anniversary needed no scene between them. A year changes much. A year changes everything. She corrected gently. They sat together in comfortable silence, watching morning lights strengthen across the basin. In the distance, smoke rose from James and Sarah's cabin as well. Their presence a welcome addition to the developing settlement. Sarah says her cousin's family is considering moving here come spring. Clara mentioned the basins filling up. Good land draws good people. Ethan observed room enough for those willing to work. He placed the leather-wrapped package between them. Brought you something. Clara unwrapped the covering carefully to reveal an iron key. Not rough and functional like the one to Ethan's cabin door, but finely crafted. Its handle formed into an intricate pattern reminiscent of intertwined branches. From the blacksmith apprentice, Ethan explained, "Use an old tool head for the metal," said he wanted to practice detailed work. Clara turned the key in her hands, admiring its unexpected beauty. "But my door doesn't have a lock." "Could add one," Ethan suggested, "if you want." The offer contained layers of meaning beyond its practical surface. A lock required a key, which in turn represented both security and access, the power to exclude or invite. "What I need a lock for?" Clara asked, genuine curiosity in her voice. "There's nothing here worth stealing." Ethan's gaze remained on the distant mountains. "Not about keeping thieves out, about knowing you can if needed." He glanced at her. "Freedom comes from choices, not just circumstances." The insight, profound in its simplicity, resonated deeply. Clara closed her fingers around the key, feeling its solid weight. "Will you help me install it?" "When you're ready," Ethan replied. As morning advanced, they walked together to the spot where they had first met 1 year earlier. The makeshift shelter where Clara had huddled for those desperate days had long since disappeared, reclaimed by forest elements. Only the clear ground remained as evidence of that pivotal beginning. "I was so afraid," then, Clara remembered, standing where her temporary refuge had been. "Convinced I would die here alone." Ethan nodded, his gaze taking in the transformed landscape. "Fear has its purpose, keeps us alert, makes us notice details, but poor foundation for living." "What would you have done if I hadn't been here?" Clara asked suddenly. "If you'd just been passing through empty forest that day?" Ethan considered the question with characteristic thoroughness. "Can't know alternate paths," he said finally. "Only the one walked." His straightforward answer held profound truth. They could only know the journey taken, not roads untraveled. "I used to wonder why they left me," Clara admitted. "Why lack that made me unworthy of their effort. Now I wonder if it wasn't about me at all." Ethan's expression softened. People make choices based on their own fears, not others' worth. They returned to the cabin as afternoon shadows lengthened across the basin. Ethan installed the lock mechanism with practiced efficiency, demonstrating how the key turns smoothly in its housing. "Perfect fit," Clara observed, testing the operation herself. "Key to your own domain," Ethan said, satisfaction evident in his voice. "Locked or unlocked by your choice alone." As he gathered his tools, Clara noticed Greyhawk and Swiftwater approaching from the forest edge. The Native American hunters returning as promised with the season's change. Their arrival completed the circle of connection that had formed during the challenging winter months. The cabin builder and the small ones still thrive. Greyhawk called in greeting as we knew they would. Swiftwater approached, examining the completed cabin with approval. Strong walls built with respect for the land will stand for many seasons. The four shared a simple meal on Clara's porch. As evening approached, venison stew, fresh bread from Sarah, wild berries preserved from summer abundant. Their conversation flowed easily, bridging cultural differences through mutual respect and shared experience of the demanding mountain environment. As darkness fell, Ethan prepared to return to his own cabin. At the edge of the clearing, he paused, looking back at Clara, silhouetted in her doorway. No longer the frightened girl he discovered a year earlier, but a woman of quiet strength and determined spirit. "Lock up if you want," he called. "Or don't. Your choice now." Clara smiled, the key warm in her palm. "I think I'll leave it unlocked tonight," she replied. Some doors are better open than closed. From their respective cabins, separate dwellings connected by a visible path worn through daily traversing, smoke rose steadily into the darkening sky. Two hearths, two lives, and between them a choice freely made, not of desperate necessity, but of deliberate intention. The small girl deemed too frail had built more than survival. She had constructed belonging on her own terms, finding strength in the very mountain that might have claimed her life. What had begun with abandonment had transformed into the rarest of gifts.